Listen closely. You can almost hear it. The moment when a handful of men decided that America should look like them, think like them, and vote like them. And if you trace that moment back, it doesn't lead to a rally or a protest or a pulpit. It leads to quiet conversations in quiet rooms. Not out in the open, but behind doors women were never allowed to walk through. Rooms where decisions were made about us, without a single one of us present. Rooms built to protect their power and to silence everyone who didn't look like them. This is where it really begins. Is the world glitching, or is it just me? Glitched. Wait, are we glitched? Feels like we're glitching. Glitched. A new Sassy Politics series. With me, Christy Chanelle. 1956, Lynchburg, Virginia. The state is deep in massive resistance. The organized, political, and religious push to block school desegregation. White citizen councils are growing. Local newspapers run editorials warning parents to protect their children from integrated classrooms. And in the middle of that backlash, Jerry Falwell opens Thomas Road Baptist Church. It begins small, just like a few dozen families, wooden pews that creak, Sunday hats, familiar voices singing the same hymns every week. But Falwell's voice carries differently. Steady, assured, polished in a way that makes every person feel like he's speaking directly to them. Falwell marries Muselle Pate 2 years later in 1958, a soft-spoken Lynchburg woman who becomes the model Christian wife he later holds up to the world. She never works outside the home. She raises their children. She writes openly about submitting to her husband's authority and freeing him to fulfill God's calling. In her own memoir, she describes herself as the quiet, obedient wife whose purpose was to make her husband's calling possible. Her life stays small while his grows bigger. Her world stays private while his becomes national. Muselle becomes proof that the old order still exists somewhere. Falwell understands something early. If he wants to protect that old order, he has to spread his message beyond the walls of the church. So he starts recording his sermons. Not professionally, not theatrically, just tapes, cheap, static-filled tapes. And he mails them to the local Virginia radio stations, one envelope at a time. Most stations ignore him. A few play a sermon here and there, but then one Lynchburg station gives him a regular slot. And that slot grows. By the early 1960s, his voice is moving across the South. 1958, Falwell preaches segregation or integration. He warns that mixing races will lead to social chaos. He says from the pulpit, the Bible clearly teaches segregation. From 1963 to 1965, the civil rights movement explodes. Black Americans march, protest, and demand the equality that they were long denied. Students at Lynchburg colleges protest segregation at lunch counters. Falwell condemns them, calls them agitators. A black newspaper writes, Falwell offers the language of God to defend the politics of Jim Crow. A local civil rights organizer says he preaches peace, but he defends segregation everywhere else. Outside his church, America is breaking open. Inside, Falwell tells families that the world is changing without their permission. For his followers, it doesn't feel like progress. It feels like loss of control, of identity, of the world they believed they were promised. Falwell speaks into that fear with surgical calm. His tone is never fire and brimstone. It's measured, reflected, intimate. A man naming the anxieties people whisper in their kitchens but never say out loud. And that kind of validation feels like protection, like home, like someone standing between you and a world that suddenly feels unfamiliar. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act passes. Falwell calls it a government intrusion on Christian communities. He never supports it, never accepts it, never sees it as necessary. Isn't that interesting? Because decades later, his own son, Jerry Falwell Jr., will end up shaping a political movement that openly targets voting rights again. History isn't linear. It loops. And sometimes it represents through bloodlines. By the late 1960s, Falwell buys TV airtime from a local Lynchburg station. Out of pocket at first, filming services with whatever equipment he can afford. Then donations flow in. A lot of them. More cameras, more staff, bigger sets, more reach. And in 1971, he founds Lynchburg Baptist College, the school that will become Liberty University, one of the most influential Christian institutions in America. And here's what's happening in the background. Women are entering the workforce. Black Americans are finally voting in meaningful numbers. Immigration reforms open the country to new cultures and new voices. America is shifting. Falwell is responding. He builds a universe where the old rules still apply, where women stay home, where families stay traditional, where Christian authority replaces civil rights, and where social change becomes something to fear, resist, and eventually organize against. He doesn't call it a movement yet, but that's what it is. A movement forming quietly in pews and in living rooms, fueled by fear, framed as faith, and carried on radio signals stretching further than anyone could have anticipated. And watching all of this from a distance is a man who understands exactly how powerful Falwell's influence can be. A man who sees a frightened population, a rising broadcaster, and a ready-made base, and realizes this is the missing half of this plan. While Jerry Falwell was building his universe in Lynchburg, Paul Weyrich was watching. He had been watching since the early 1970s, not as a believer, not as a follower, but as a strategist studying a map. Weyrich knew something Falwell didn't. White evangelicals had refused for decades to touch politics. They stayed in their own churches. They kept to their sermons, Falwell especially. He preached that pastors should never march in the streets or meddle in any legislation. But Weyrich wasn't looking for pastors who wanted politics. He was looking for pastors who could move people. And Falwell, he could move people. Week after week, Weyrich watched the Old Time Gospel Hour.
It's time now for the Old Time Gospel Hour with Jerry Falwell, pastor of the Thomas Road Baptist Church in Lynchburg, Virginia.
He saw Falwell's influence measured not in doctrine, but in emotion. Millions of white Christians who trusted his voice more than they trusted their own government. But the real shift, the spark Weyrich had been waiting for, didn't come from Falwell's pulpit. It came from Washington. 1978. The IRS launches a case against Bob Jones University for enforcing racist policies while still claiming federal tax-exempt status. A Christian school punished for segregation. The white evangelical world erupts. Anger, fear, rage at the federal government interfering in Christian life. And Weyrich sees it instantly. This is it. the issue that can unify them. Not scripture, not morality, not even Roe versus Wade, but race, control, power, a fight they can rally against. And he knows Falwell cannot ignore this moment. Not if he wants to protect the world he's building in Lynchburg, a world where women stay home, Black Americans stay contained, and Christianity stays in charge. So Weyrich begins to move. He studies Falwell's broadcasts, studies his fundraising, his language, his reach. He builds a psychological profile. Every strength, every weakness, every pressure point. He doesn't need history with Falwell. He already knows everything. To Weyrich, Falwell is not a preacher. He is a vessel, a man with millions behind him and no idea how easily that influence can be converted into political muscle. Then the Bob Jones case explodes again in early 1979. Evangelicals panic. Falwell speaks out, and the line between God and politics blurs. And Weyrich decides it's time. He makes the call, plans the meeting, a closed door in Washington. No congregation, no cameras, just strategy. There is no surviving record of what happened next. No letter of invitation, no transcript, no photo of their first handshake. And maybe that's the point. Most things that reshape a nation don't happen on camera. They happen in the dark. Because real power rarely seeks an audience. What we do know is this. Falwell walked into that room believing he was meeting an ally. Paul Weyrich knew he was meeting an opportunity. 1979. A year pulsing with neon, freedom, and the kind of cultural electricity that makes older generations nervous. Blondie's Heart of Glass is everywhere. Donna Summer is still the reigning queen of every disco dance floor. Studio 54 is the brightest star in the nightlife sky. America is experimenting with everything: style, music, identity, independence. And in the White House sits President Jimmy Carter, a Democratic leader who talks about human rights, peace, solar energy, and the idea that government should help people rise, not keep them in line. His tone is soft, compassionate, almost pastoral. To many Americans, the country finally feels open. Open to change, open to possibility, open to becoming something new. But to white conservative evangelicals, it feels like something they once controlled is slipping through their fingers. It's inside that tension between a country expanding and a movement afraid of expansion that this meeting happens. A borrowed conference room in Washington, D.C., 1979. Fluorescent lights hum overhead. A rotary phone sits heavy on the table. 2 styrofoam cups cooling beside blinds that never quite close all the way. No laptops. Just 2 legal pads and 2 pens. And from Weyrich's perspective, the unmistakable sense that the future of the conservative movement is about to be rewritten. Falwell enters in a dark traditional suit, composed, polite, curious, almost Bogart still. He's not here to be recruited. He's here to listen. Weyrich is already in the room, seated, ready. His folder opened in a neat column of notes, the pages marked and remarked. He's the kind of man who arrives early, not to make a good impression, but to study the angles, the lighting, the distance between chairs, the vantage point of whoever walks in next. A strategist in stillness. Falwell closes the door behind him. The room feels insulated, almost airtight. This isn't a meeting of equals. It's a convergence. One man brings the crowds, the trust, the emotional engine of a movement, he hasn't fully recognized yet. The other brings a blueprint. There is no transcript of what he said, no minutes, no surviving notes, just what history confirms. This room is where the next chapter of American politics first took shape. Quietly, efficiently, deliberately. The meeting ends, but the work begins almost immediately. Within weeks, something new starts to take shape. Not because of a single conversation, but because Weyrich walked into that room with a plan already formed. He didn't bring Falwell to Washington for a friendly exchange. He brought him because the movement he'd been building in the shadows needed that public face. This political awakening of white evangelicals wasn't born in that room. Weyrich had been sketching it for years. An organization that could mobilize Christians who had stayed out of politics for decades. He tried everything: prayer circles, school board activism, grassroots mailers, but none of it caught fire. Because the movement didn't yet have the emotional engine it needed. Falwell was the missing piece, and once they walked out of that Washington conference room, the blueprint turns real. Late 1979, the name is chosen, the moral majority. A name that tells you a lie before you've even read the bylaws. A movement claiming morality, claiming majority, claiming divine mandate before casting a single vote. Weyrich handled the structure, the fundraising systems, the political targeting, the voter registration machinery, the think tank strategists who would define messaging for the next 40 years. Falwell handled the microphone, and millions listened. The moral majority was built on 4 pillars. Pro-family, which meant women returning to the home, rejecting workplace equality, and accepting submission as virtue. The same model Falwell preached in his own household. Pro-life, but not because of Roe v. Wade. They barely mentioned abortion in the 1970s. It was a race, and the Bob Jones ruling, that lit the fuse. Pro-American, meaning a very specific American. White, Christian, obedient, traditional. Moral responsibility, a coded phrase used to justify voter suppression, anti-LGBTQ policy, and a political agenda packaged as righteousness. These 4 pillars weren't theology. They were strategy. A way to turn the fear into Falwell's pews. Fear of civil rights. Fear of women working. Fear of immigration. Fear of modern life into political power. And the reach? Immediate. The old-time gospel hour becomes a recruitment engine. Letters pour in, donations climb. Churches across the South begin aligning themselves with this moral movement. Falwell travels constantly, speaking tours, rallies, committee meetings. He's becoming the national face of political uprising and still claims it's just about values. It isn't. It's about power. And women feel the shift first. Pamphlets appear warning that feminism is destroying the family. Sermons declare that wives must submit, that careers are sinful if they compete with motherhood, that birth control encourages rebellion. Musel Falwell, obedient, quiet, supportive, is held up as the model of what a proper Christian woman should be. What began as the dynamic in one pastor's home is now sold as the national political ideal. Black Americans feel it too. Voting rights become government overreach. Affirmative action becomes reverse discrimination. Desegregation becomes federal intrusion. And the moral majority rallies white Christians with language pulled straight from earlier decades, all of it protecting the racial hierarchy of the South. It is Jim Crow rebranded as Christian liberty. Immigrants feel the shift next. The movement leans hard into fear of outsiders, painting new communities as threats to American identity, the same framework that will one day fuel Trump's Muslim ban, Stephen Miller's border strategy, and the spine of Project 2025. And while Falwell preaches values, Weyrich builds the machine. He designs the voter guides. He maps out districts. He funds money into the races that evangelicals never touched before. School boards, city councils, state legislators, because Weyrich understood something essential. Political power doesn't start in Washington. It starts in the places no one is watching. By 1980, there are enough pieces of the machine in place that a single spark will ignite a whole country. That spark? Ronald Reagan. And this is where the merge becomes a movement. Falwell brings the crowds, Weyrich brings the strategy, Reagan brings the legitimacy. 3 men, 1 mission: reshape America under the banner of faith through the machinery of politics, powered by fear. The moral majority is no longer an idea. It is a force. And America is about to feel its first impact. Because this time, the movement has found its president.